The trail wound through a quiet stretch of northern Colorado, where the October air carried a faint bite, the kind that made every breath feel sharp and clean. Shannon Parker walked beside her husband, Roland, listening to the crunch of gravel under their boots and the soft hiss of wind drifting between the pines. They had hiked parts of this area before, but today the forest felt unusually empty. Even the birds seemed to be holding their voices. Shannon noticed the silence first. It settled around them in a way that made her slow her steps, turning her head as if she could find the missing sound by looking for it. The sun hung low enough to cast long stripes of light across the ground, but inside the canyon the shadows thickened early. Shannon didn't mind. She liked the feeling of being tucked between ridgelines. Still, something felt off. Roland sensed it too. He stopped, scanned the brush along the hillside, then kept walking. Shannon asked if he saw something. He said no, but his voice carried a tension that didn't match the word. Another 100 yards passed before Shannon heard the noise, a faint shift of weight on dry soil, the kind of sound you could mistake for a deer if it hadn't come from so close. She looked back and saw nothing. She looked again and caught a quick movement, a shape slipping between scrub and rock. Her stomach tightened. The shape moved smoothly, low to the ground, with a confidence that didn't match a harmless animal. She grabbed Roland's arm and pointed. This time he saw it too. The mountain lion wasn't charging. It was pacing them, matching their speed from the hillside above. Shannon had read enough to know that mountain lions rarely let themselves be seen. When they did, it wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. The cat's head stayed level, its shoulders rolling in slow waves, tail twitching in faint arcs behind it. Shannon raised her voice, shouting, trying to make herself look bigger. Roland did the same. Neither action seemed to impress the animal. Its eyes remained locked on them, unblinking. They decided to keep moving but not turn their backs. Shannon's heartbeat pushed into her throat with every step. She gripped her hiking pole so tightly her knuckles throbbed. Roland tried to talk loudly, hoping to scare the cat off, but Shannon could hear the strain in his voice. The mountain lion faded behind a cluster of brush, and for a few seconds, Shannon wondered if it had moved on. Then, everything exploded at once. The lion burst from the hillside with a speed Shannon didn't know an animal could possess. She didn't even have time to raise her arms before it slammed into her, knocking her off her feet and driving her into the dirt. The impact stole the breath from her lungs. She tasted soil before she understood what had happened. The lion's jaws clamped around her face, teeth sinking past skin and into muscle. She could feel them grind against bone. She screamed, but the sound was muffled by the weight crushing her jaw. The lion shook her violently, dragging her across the ground as if she weighed nothing. Shannon's hands flew upward in instinct, clawing at fur, reaching for eyes she couldn't quite find. She felt its claws rake along her scalp, tearing hair and skin. Panic sharpened into a cold, electric clarity. She wasn't thinking about survival in an abstract way. She was fighting because every second she hesitated was a second the lion owned her. Roland lunged, swinging his backpack at the lion's ribs with all the strength he had. The lion released Shannon just long enough to twist toward him, snarling so loudly it vibrated in her ears. Blood streamed down her face and dripped into her mouth. She staggered to her knees, vision doubling, head pounding. Roland struck again, screaming, forcing the cat to divide its attention. Shannon used the moment to crawl backward, wiping blood from her eyes with trembling fingers. The lion circled, lowering itself into another crouch. Shannon saw its shoulder muscles pulse. She barely had time to react before it rushed her again. It collided with her shoulder, knocking her flat on her back. Its claws scraped across her upper arm and tore into her scalp. Roland grabbed its hind legs, pulling, kicking, dragging the animal off her inch by inch. Shannon jammed her hiking pole against its side, bracing it with both hands. The lion whipped its head toward her, jaws snapping inches from her face. Then, as suddenly as it began, the attack broke. The lion jerked backward, tail flicking, ears pinned. It hesitated, studying them with a strange, calculating stillness. Roland shouted again, raising his backpack. Shannon pushed herself upright, blood dripping onto the dirt. The cat finally turned, bolting into the trees with a flash of tawny fur. The silence that followed felt unreal, as if even the forest was holding its breath. Shannon raised her hands to her face and felt deep punctures, torn skin, and warm blood soaking into her shirt. Roland pressed his hands to her cheeks, trying to stop the bleeding while scanning the tree line in case the lion returned. They didn't run. They walked quickly, steadily, talking loudly until they reached a clearing where they could safely call for help. Shannon's knees buckled more than once. She kept touching her jaw, afraid it might fall apart in her hands. First responders arrived fast. The firefighters wrapped her face, treated her for blood loss, and loaded her into an ambulance. She kept apologizing to them, though she didn't know why. Shock made every sensation feel far away. When the paramedics told her she had survived something almost no one survives, she didn't feel brave or lucky. She felt hollow, shaking, grateful she could still draw breath. At the hospital, doctors cleaned the wounds, stitched what could be stitched, and explained what the recovery would look like. She listened quietly, absorbing the reality that her face would never fully return to what it had been. But she was alive. She could still speak. She could still walk. Wildlife officers later tracked and euthanized the mountain lion, an underweight female showing signs of desperation and aggression. Shannon didn't celebrate the news. She understood the necessity, but she also understood that the lion had acted out of survival, just as she had. In the months that followed, she fought through pain, nightmares, and long stretches of physical healing. She learned to touch the scars on her face without flinching. She learned to breathe again on trails. Though the first time she stepped into deep woods, her hands trembled uncontrollably. But she kept walking. She refused to surrender the pieces of herself that existed long before the lion ever crossed her path. Her survival wasn't defined by strength alone. It was shaped by fear, instinct, and the desperate will to live when everything seemed seconds from ending. She survived because she fought. She survived because Roland fought. She survived because something deep inside her refused to let go. And she carries that with her still, not as a horror she hides from, but as proof that she lived through one of the rarest and most violent encounters a person can face and walked out of the wilderness alive. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more true stories.